Welcome to this quiet and gentle night. As you close your eyes, feeling the soft bedding around you and allowing your breathing to steady, please allow me to guide you across the boundaries of time. Imagine a faint breeze carrying the misty moisture of the Nile, blowing softly across the dry desert sands, bringing with it the sweet, earthy scent of the distant reed beds. The moonlight flows like cool water over the magnificent yet empty stone steps of the palace, casting long, silent shadows behind the massive granite statues of the gods. This is a world far removed from the rushing noise of modern life, where there is no anxious ticking of clocks, only the incredibly faint crackle of distant torches burning in the cool night air. Tonight, we will begin a long, slow, and deeply immersive journey together within this ancient world. In the grand tapestries of history we are so familiar with, pharaohs and monarchs sit tall upon elevated thrones, draped in heavy, ornate fabrics and wearing crowns of solid gold, appearing as tireless deities who tolerate no mortal gaze. The papyrus scrolls of the past only record their vast conquests and their towering tombs reaching toward the sky. Yet, when the dusk finally faded, when the heavy palace doors slowly closed behind them and all the terrified subjects retreated, how did they truly spend their long, quiet nights hidden behind thick linen curtains? Stripped of the garments that symbolized absolute power, these rulers were merely flesh and bone trapped in golden cages. They shared our human exhaustion, harbored their own bizarre private obsessions, and felt the same profound loneliness that only reveals itself in the dead of night. If you are willing to keep a little patience tonight, letting your mind settle alongside the rhythm of my voice, you will find a profound peace unique to this quiet hour. We will walk through the dimly lit corridors of a pharaoh's sleeping quarters, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of mire in the heavy air. We will hide within the flickering shadows of an oil lamp to observe the absurd realities of Roman nobility after they have taken off their public masks. There is no need to rush toward shocking conclusions, nor must you try to remember cold historical dates. Simply let this slow narrative wash over you. Just relax your shoulders and let these hidden details of human nature slowly emerge like drifting starlight, gently guiding you into a deep and restful sleep. Chapter 1: The Golden Cage by the Nile. Tonight, we will step into the quiet night of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh after he has stripped away his divine disguise, feeling the heavy burden hidden behind absolute power. Starting from the elaborate rituals of preparing for sleep, we will witness the profound loneliness this mortal body, revered as a living god, endured in the dead of night, as well as the absurd routines he had to follow in private to maintain his divine image. Carrying the tranquility we just felt in the night breeze, let us turn our gaze deep into the city of Thebes, toward a massive palace shrouded in darkness. As the last trace of the setting sun sinks below the edge of the desert, heavy cedar doors are pushed shut by two robust guards. A low, drawn-out friction echoes as the doors close slowly, completely sealing off the outside world from the inner bedchamber. At this moment, the air is thick with the suffocatingly rich scent of blue lotus and frankincense that has been burning all day. Inside, a few clay lamps filled with castor oil cast a faint, flickering, yellowish glow. With the closing of the doors, the ubiquitous daylight sounds of prayers, praises, and chanting priests vanish instantly, replaced by a profound, almost ringing, dead silence. Within this total silence, the living God, who was incredibly majestic during the day, now sits exhausted on the edge of a soft linen bed. Several personal attendants step forward silently like ghosts, carefully beginning to remove the heavy burdens from his body. The first to be taken off is a broad gold collar weighing several pounds. This magnificent ornament, inlaid with lapis lazuli, turquoise, and carnelian, reflected the blinding glory of the sun during the day as a symbol of supreme power. Yet, as it is gently lifted from his neck, deep red marks pressed into his collarbone by the heavy metal are glaringly revealed. The gold drops onto a cushioned mahogany table with a dull thud, echoing through the empty chamber, as if an invisible pyramid has just been lifted from his shoulders. Immediately following, the chief guard's hands, slick with premium mirror oil, slowly reach toward the pharaoh's head. With extreme caution, he unfastens the hidden clasp under the jaw, slowly lifting the blue and white striped Nemes headdress that symbolizes royal authority. As the headdress and the forged gold false beard are removed together, the pharaoh's bald head, shaven completely bare to accommodate wigs and crowns, is finally exposed to the cool night breeze. Having been trapped inside dense, unbreathable fabrics for hours, his scalp is covered in a fine layer of sweat, dotted with faint red rashes from constant friction. The pharaoh closes his eyes, taking a deep breath of the slightly chilled night air, savoring this brief, secret comfort. In this fleeting moment, he finally reverts to a mortal body with normal temperature and touch. In the dim light, several young slaves silently glide into the shadows carrying large alabaster basins. The basins are filled with Nile water that has been kept warm over a stove, the surface floating with crushed natron and soothing chamomile. A sponge absorbs the warm water, gently wiping across the pharaoh's back, shoulders, and aching legs. The water washes away dried, sweat, thick mineral fats used for sun protection, and the layer of yellow ochre applied to project the flawless skin of a deity. As the grime is slowly washed away, his true skin is revealed. No longer the smooth, flawless surface seen in frescoes, but real flesh marked by age and calloused by years of wearing heavy ceremonial garments. The slow drip of water onto the stone floor becomes the only sound in the cavernous room. Once the bathing is complete, the attendants begin the most intimate massage ritual. They pour precious scented oils from carved glass bottles into their palms, rubbing their hands together to warm the liquid. This special mixture of moringa oil, cedar, and myrrh extract is meant to soothe aching muscles. The attendants press their fingertips into the pharaoh's spine and lower back, areas that have grown as stiff as the granite pillars outside the palace from maintaining an absolutely rigid, majestic posture for hours on end. When the pressure slightly increases, the ruler, who never shows any sign of pain in the daylight, furrows his brow tightly in the weak candlelight. A very faint, suppressed grunt escapes from deep within his throat, a sound of suffering that is absolutely forbidden to be heard by anyone once the sun rises. As the scented oil is massaged into his feet, another cruel detail of the pharaoh's private life is laid bare. Those feet, forever depicted as long and perfect in stone reliefs, are actually severely deformed from long-term use of stiff, ceremonial sandals woven from papyrus and palm leaves. Thick yellow calluses have formed on the joints of his toes, and his big toes curve slightly inward from the constant pressure of the straps. An attendant uses an incredibly gentle touch to apply a cooling aloe vera ointment over the cracked skin. Leaning back against linen cushions, the pharaoh silently stares at his ugly, aching feet. He knows all too well that when dawn arrives, these feet must once again slide into those magnificent but tortuous gold-leafed sandals to take firm, divine steps. When all the cleansing and relaxation rituals end, the attendants retreat from the bedchamber as quietly as a receding tide, leaving the pharaoh alone to face the long night. He slowly lies down on a wide bed carved from ebony and inlaid with ivory and gold. However, what awaits his head is not a pillow stuffed with soft goose down, as we might imagine, but a crescent-shaped, hard headrest carved from alabaster. This rigid groove, designed to fit the curve of the neck, ensures the pharaoh does not ruin his elaborate hairstyle or crush the protective amulets he must wear even in sleep. As cold stone touches his fragile neck, the pharaoh can only carefully adjust his posture, seeking a barely tolerable balance point. This restrictive posture, limiting even his rest, is part of the absurd daily routine he must strictly observe to maintain the illusion of a god. Time slips away slowly in the silence, yet sleep does not visit this exhausted king as hoped. Though his body is drained to its absolute limits, his mind remains hyper-alert in the darkness. While the vast bedchamber is surrounded by heavy guards, this very fact amplifies his deep-seated claustrophobia and paranoia. A faint breeze slips through the gap in the curtains, causing the flame of a corner oil lamp to jump violently. This sudden movement stretches the shadow of a tall wardrobe across the opposite wall, briefly looking exactly like an assassin lurking with a raised dagger. The pharaoh's breathing instantly quickens, and his hand instinctively darts beneath the linen sheets, where a sharp dagger forged from meteorite iron is hidden. Only after confirming it was a false alarm does he slowly relax his sweating palm. As the absolute master of both sides of the Nile, he holds the power of life and death over millions during the day. But in the dead of night within his golden cage, he cannot control his own fears. He fears the secret plots orchestrated by the priestly class. He dreads a poisoned cup offered by the harem in the name of producing an heir. And above all, he is terrified that once he becomes old and weak, he will be viewed as abandoned by the gods and brutally replaced. These anxieties, tightly suppressed by his majestic mask during the day, turn into countless venomous snakes slithering around his ornate bed at night. With his eyes wide open, he stares blankly at the ceiling constructed from expensive timber. Far beyond the walls, he listens to the monotonous sound of the Nile lapping against its banks, the only rhythm in the world that will not change upon his command. Within that sound of water, he feels a profound sense of powerlessness. To drive away this maddening anxiety, the pharaoh slowly lifts his head from the hard stone headrest and steps barefoot onto the freezing stone floor. He does not call for the guards outside. Instead, he walks alone deep into the bedchamber, toward an inconspicuous small cedar cabinet. Opening the door, there are no priceless treasures inside, only a rough clay pot, its surface heavily worn and stained with black marks. He pulls out the wooden stopper, and a thick, sweet, and fermented scent of fig wine wafts into the air. Tilting his head back, he takes a large gulp directly from the rim. This unrefined, slightly bitter commoner's drink is absolutely forbidden from ever appearing on the royal dining table. Yet, in countless sleepless nights, it remains the only secret antidote capable of momentarily numbing his highly strung nerves. With the faint warmth brought on by the alcohol, he returns to the edge of his bed. This time, from beneath his linen undergarments, he pulls out a tiny amulet carved from ordinary bone. This is not a magnificent artifact blessed by high priests through elaborate temple rituals. It is something his mother secretly slipped into his hand on her deathbed when he was just a child. The carvings on the amulet have long been worn smooth, but in moments of supreme isolation, the pharaoh rubs it repeatedly with his rough thumb, presses it against his lips, and whispers words only he can hear. In this solitary moment, he is no longer the revered incarnation of Osiris, but simply a fragile boy longing for protection in the endless dark. He does not know how much time has passed, but the night sky outside the window begins to take on a deep purplish-blue hue, the silent precursor to the approaching dawn. The temperature drops to its lowest point, and the few remaining oil lamps in the bedchamber extinguish one by one as their fuel is exhausted, leaving only trails of pungent blue smoke to dissipate into the air. The pharaoh knows that his private time as a mortal man is coming to an end. Soon, the first rays of sunlight will crest the edge of the desert, the temple bells will ring, and priests in white robes will line up outside the grand doors with gold basins and majestic garments, ready to awaken their sun god. The mere thought of putting on that heavy golden crown and restoring that stiff, majestic face brings a preemptive wave of bone-deep exhaustion. Obediently, he places his head back onto the cold, crescent-shaped stone headrest, closing his bloodshot eyes. He must seize this last sliver of time, forcing his body into even a momentary, shallow sleep. For when the palace doors are pushed open once more, he cannot display a single ounce of weakness or fatigue. He must sit there like a flawless statue, accepting the worship of the entire world, continuing to play the role of the infallible, tireless, great deity within this golden cage by the Nile. And all the loneliness, fear, pain, and hidden vulnerability he experienced tonight will remain deeply buried beneath these thick stone walls, never to be written into any papyrus scroll of history. Chapter 2. The Queen Who Fooled the World. Let us explore the true private life hidden behind Nefertiti's perfect mask, penetrating the fog of history to recreate the faint candlelight within the deep palace. We will see how she utilized intimate makeup rituals, custom scents, and a mysterious body double to maintain the illusion of power and her own safety in the quiet night. The heavy stone walls of the pharaoh's bedchamber slowly fade into the quiet night, the monotonous sound of the Nile lapping against its banks guiding us away from his hidden anxieties. We drift backward through the gentle currents of time, arriving at the opulent city of Amarna, where the night sky hangs heavy with shimmering stars over a grand palace. This is a city built entirely to worship the sun, yet right now it is completely swallowed by the cool, forgiving darkness. The moonlight filters through high, narrow windows, casting pale geometric shapes across the brightly painted plaster floors. In the deepest, most secluded wing of the palace, the air is thick with the lingering smoke of burnt kaifi incense. Here, behind doors guarded by silent eunuchs, the most beautiful woman in the ancient world is finally allowed to exhale. Nefertiti, the queen whose very name means "the beautiful one has come," sits quietly before an elaborate dressing table crafted from imported cedar and polished ivory. In the historical records, she is forever frozen as a flawless, serene bust, her perfect cheekbones and elegant neck admired by countless generations. But tonight, bathed only in the warm, trembling glow of a single oil lamp, she is merely a woman weary from carrying the weight of a divine empire. She gazes into a highly polished bronze mirror, but she does not look at the reflection with vanity. Instead, her eyes hold a deep, guarded weariness, tracing the faint lines of exhaustion that the thick, ceremonial makeup has successfully hidden from the priests and her subjects all day. A young, trusted handmaiden kneels softly on the woven reed mat beside her, holding a delicate alabaster bowl filled with warm milk and crushed almonds. The girl dips a piece of fine, unbleached linen into the mixture, wringing it out before gently pressing it against the queen's eyelids. Slowly, the thick layers of dark galena kohl, the heavy black eyeliner that gave her that piercing, godlike gaze, begin to melt and smear. The green malachite powder, painted on her lids to ward off the evil eye and the harsh sun, is carefully wiped away, turning the white cloth into a muddy canvas of green and black. As the vibrant colors disappear, the sharp, intimidating deity vanishes, revealing a pair of soft, tired, and remarkably human brown eyes. The handmaiden then moves to the queen's lips, wiping away the deep red tint created from crushed carmine beetles and a base of beeswax. Without this vibrant color, her lips look slightly pale and chapped, a testament to the dry, relentless desert winds she must endure during endless outdoor religious ceremonies. Next comes the careful unfastening of her towering, blue cylindrical crown, a headpiece so heavy it required her to keep her chin unnaturally elevated for hours. As the crown is lifted away and placed onto a wooden stand, Nefertiti instinctively reaches up to massage her stiff neck. The muscles corded along her nape are rigid and aching, pulsing with a dull pain that she must never betray in the presence of her court. Beneath the grand crowns and the elaborate, tightly braided wigs, the queen's head is completely shaven, much like her husband's, to maintain cleanliness in the sweltering Egyptian heat. The handmaiden takes a small vial of sweet almond oil, mixed with the essence of crushed lotus flowers, pouring a few golden drops into her palms. She rubs her hands together to warm the oil before gently massaging it into the queen's bare scalp. The friction brings a rosy flush to the pale skin, soothing the tiny red bumps left behind by the tight, suffocating grip of the heavy wigs. Nefertiti closes her eyes, letting out a long, shuddering breath as the gentle circular motions of the massage slowly release the immense physical tension stored in her head. The removal of her makeup and wigs is only the first step in dismantling her divine armor. During the day, the queen wears a solid cone of perfumed animal fat perched atop her wig, which slowly melts in the sun to coat her in a continuous heavy scent of lilies and myrrh. Now a slave approaches with a sponge, soaked in lukewarm water, infused with rosemary, meticulously washing away the sticky residue of the wax that has run down her neck and shoulders. The water turns cloudy as it cleanses her skin, stripping away the overwhelming, manufactured fragrance of a goddess. Left behind is simply the natural, subtle scent of clean skin, warm and vulnerable in the chill of the desert night. As the cleansing finishes, it is time to remove the jewelry that binds her. Heavy bracelets of solid gold, thick bands of electrum, and rings set with massive carnelians are taken off one by one, placed with soft clinking sounds into a velvet-lined wooden chest. When a particularly wide, heavy gold collar is unclasped from her chest, it leaves behind a faint, bruised indentation on her collarbone, much like the pharaoh we saw earlier. These ornaments are not just decorations. They are heavy shackles of prestige, constant reminders of the wealth and power she must project. Free from the cold metal, she rubs her wrists, feeling the blood finally circulating properly through her hands, enjoying a lightness she is only permitted to feel in absolute secrecy. Suddenly, a soft rustle of linen draws our attention to a dark corner of the bedchamber, a space entirely untouched by the lamplight. A figure emerges slowly from the shadows, stepping silently onto the painted floor. In the dim light, the resemblance is uncanny and deeply unsettling. It is a young woman of the exact same height and build as the queen, her face contoured and painted to mimic Nefertiti's iconic features. This is her shadow, her secret decoy, a desperate measure taken in a royal court, simmering with political jealousy and quiet assassination plots. In a world where poison and daggers hide behind polite smiles, The queen's survival depends on creating an illusion of omnipresence and invulnerability. Without a single word exchanged between them, the decoy moves slowly toward the center of the room, approaching the grand, opulent bed meant for the queen. She climbs into the luxurious sheets of fine linen, positioning herself exactly as Nefertiti would, her face turned toward the doorway so that any guard peering through the crack would see the royal profile. The decoy pulls the thin blankets up to her chin, her breathing steady and practiced, preparing to spend the entire night pretending to be the most powerful woman in Egypt. Should an assassin slip past the guards and strike in the dark, it is this silent, loyal girl who will bear the fatal blow, a tragic human shield disguised as a deity. Leaving her decoy in the grand bed, the real Nefertiti stands up, wrapping a plain, unadorned robe of soft white wool around her chilled shoulders. She walks barefoot across the cold floor, slipping through a cleverly concealed, narrow doorway hidden behind a large tapestry depicting scenes of the Nile. This door leads to a much smaller, windowless, and entirely secret inner chamber nestled within the thickest walls of the palace. There is no gold here, no elaborate murals of gods and chariots, and no heavy incense choking the air. It is a simple, sparse room containing only a modest, comfortable cot, a single water jug, and a small, unlit brazier. This is her true sanctuary, the only place where she is completely safe from the world's watching eyes. In the total darkness of this hidden room, Nefertiti lies down on the modest cot, pulling a thick woolen blanket closely around her body. Here, she does not have to worry about maintaining a serene expression. Nor does she need to fear the treacherous whispers of ambitious priests. She curls into a tight ball, her knees drawn up toward her chest, a posture of pure, instinctive self-comfort that would shock anyone who only knew her as a rigid, towering queen. The silence in this stone cocoon is absolute, pressing against her ears like a heavy blanket. In this suffocating but secure isolation, she allows herself a moment of quiet weakness, a few silent tears slipping down her cheek, unburdening her soul. Even as exhaustion pulls at her mind, a small, persistent part of her consciousness remains stubbornly awake, calculating the demands of the approaching dawn. She knows that in just a few short hours, she must emerge from this hidden room, step back into the grand chamber, and seamlessly switch places with her decoy. She will have to sit still as the heavy makeup is reapplied, transforming her soft, mortal face back into the sharp, unyielding mask of a living goddess. She will have to don the agonizingly heavy crown and step out into the blinding sunlight to smile at a crowd that only loves her as an idea, not as a person. The thought of tomorrow's performance is a heavy weight on her chest. Yet it is a burden she has long accepted as the true cost of her extraordinary power. As the night deepens over Amarna, the city of the sun remains lost in shadow, completely unaware of the elaborate deception playing out within the palace walls. The decoy sleeps lightly in the grand bed, a perfect, painted target, while the true queen hides away like a frightened bird in a stone nest. Her breathing gradually slows, syncing with the quiet, rhythmic silence of the completely lightless chamber. She forces herself to let go of the political maneuvers, the heavy crowns, and the exhausting necessity of being flawless for her subjects. Stripped of her makeup, her jewels, and her very identity, the woman who fooled the world finally surrenders to the darkness, finding a deep, untroubled sleep that her divine persona could never possibly achieve. Chapter 3: The Hidden Obsessions of Pharaohs. Let us pull back the heavy linen curtains to reveal the peculiar late-night pastimes of these ancient rulers. In the quiet hours, accompanied by the soft strumming of a harp, we will observe the bizarre yet fiercely guarded obsessions that occupied a pharaoh's restless mind. Leaving the hidden sanctuary of Queen Nefertiti behind, we drift further down the timeline of the ancient Nile, carried by the gentle, rhythmic strumming of a wooden harp. The night air here is warmer, carrying the sweet, earthy fragrance of ripening dates and the faint, dusty smell of hot sand cooling under the stars. We arrive at an expansive, open-air courtyard nestled deep within a grand royal complex, completely isolated from the sleeping city outside. High limestone walls block the desert winds, creating a still, heavy atmosphere illuminated only by the soft, sputtering glow of burning animal fat in tall bronze braziers. It is in this secluded, echoing space that the true, unvarnished eccentricities of the living gods were allowed to briefly surface. In the center of the courtyard, an aging pharaoh sits absolutely motionless on a padded cedar stool, a stark contrast to his dynamic, commanding daytime persona. He is staring intensely into a deep, sunken enclosure carved directly into the cool stone floor, separated from him only by a thin, ornate wooden railing. From the dark depths of the pit, the low, guttural breathing of a massive, captive Nubian lion echoes against the walls, vibrating through the soles of the pharaoh's bare feet. He holds a piece of raw, glistening meat in his trembling hand, the sharp metallic scent of blood mixing strangely with the perfumed incense of the palace. This is not a grand public display of dominance, but a deeply private, almost hypnotic communion with a creature he views as a fellow divine predator. The pharaoh tosses the meat into the shadows, listening to the heavy, satisfying sound of powerful jaws snapping it out of the air. While his subjects believe he commands the very rising of the sun, in these quiet midnight hours, his true obsession lies in the raw, uncontrollable forces of the natural world. He spends countless sleepless nights sitting by this pit, studying the beast's movements, its raw muscle, and its terrifying independence. In a life dictated by rigid ceremonies, endless prayers, and calculating priests, the simple, honest savagery of the lion provides a bizarre sense of comfort. It is an obsession born not of cruelty, but of a desperate desire to connect with something powerful that does not care about his golden crown or his divine titles. Leaving the heavy breathing of the lion behind, we glide silently through a series of columned walkways to a hidden courtyard completely overgrown with dense, exotic foliage. Here, the humid air is intensely fragrant, laced with the intoxicating, almost dizzying perfume of night-blooming jasmine and the dark, velvety petals of the black lotus. A different ruler, draped in a simple, unbleached linen tunic, moves slowly among the terracotta pots, a small copper watering vessel in his hand. He is not admiring beautiful decorative blooms, but meticulously tending to a highly classified collection of rare, deeply toxic plants brought back from distant military campaigns. The moonlight catches the damp, waxy surface of leaves that contain enough poison to wipe out his entire royal guard. He kneels gently beside a thorny vine, his calloused fingertips hovering just millimeters away from its lethal, dripping sap, his breathing shallow and focused. For a man who has every meal tasted by 3 different servants to prevent poisoning, maintaining this deadly garden is a bizarre, thrilling game of psychological roulette. In a highly structured life, where his safety is obsessively managed by others, cultivating his own localized garden of death offers a twisted sense of absolute control. He inhales the sharp, medicinal scent of the bruised leaves, feeling a strange rush of adrenaline in the quiet darkness. It is an obsession fueled by a morbid curiosity, a quiet rebellion against the suffocating bubble of protection that surrounds his divine existence. Leaving the intoxicating scent of the poisonous garden, we follow a narrow, torch-lit corridor that winds upward toward the flat roof of the palace, where a different kind of nocturnal obsession unfolds. Here, beneath a vast, unpolluted canopy of brilliant, shimmering stars, another royal figure is hunched over a long, low table made of polished ebony. The dry night air crackles slightly as he frantically unrolls a fragile, incredibly ancient papyrus scroll, its edges frayed and crumbling into fine dust beneath his eager fingertips. He is not studying tax records or military strategies, but delving into outlawed, esoteric texts of dark magic and complex astrology. The faint, silvery starlight reflects off his widened eyes as he searches for hidden patterns, desperately trying to decode the whispers of the cosmos. Beside the ancient scrolls sits an array of peculiar, finely crafted instruments. Water clocks dripping with agonizing slowness, brass astrolabes, and perfectly weighted plumb bobs. The pharaoh is meticulously charting the seemingly erratic path of a red wandering star, his breath catching in his throat with every precise measurement. This obsession with the night sky is fueled by a profound, gnawing paranoia about his own mortality and the longevity of his dynasty. He believes that if he can just understand the secret mathematical language of the heavens, he can outsmart fate itself, dodging the assassinations and plagues that constantly haunt his waking thoughts. The quiet scratching of his reed pen against the papyrus is the sound of a powerful man frantically trying to control the uncontrollable. Descending from the breezy, starlit roof down into the lowest, coolest cellars of the royal residence, we find perhaps the most unsettling obsession of all. Surrounded by absolute darkness save for a single, shielded oil lamp, a young ruler sits cross-legged on a woven reed mat, completely absorbed in arranging hundreds of miniature, intricately carved wooden figures. These are Ushabti dolls, tiny servants painted with vibrant blues and golds, meant to labor for him in the afterlife. With the intense focus of a child playing with toys, he spends hours meticulously organizing these tiny workers around a perfect scale model of his future burial chamber. The smell of fresh paint and sanded cedar fills the small room, masking the underlying scent of damp earth. He gently picks up a miniature overseer figure, his thumbs slowly tracing the smooth, painted lines of its tiny face, finding a strange, profound solace in the certainty of his own death. While the actual construction of his massive stone tomb is a noisy, chaotic public works project involving thousands of sweaty laborers, this miniature world is entirely under his absolute, silent control. Here, in the quiet cellar, he can perfectly orchestrate his own eternity, free from the messy, unpredictable realities of ruling the living. This morbid fascination with planning every agonizing detail of his afterlife is a soothing balm for a mind constantly pressured by the demands of the present. The perfect, silent obedience of his wooden servants brings a peace that his real court never could. Moving away from the scent of cedar and fresh paint in the cellar, we drift toward a very peculiar windowless room located precisely in the architectural center of the palace. The walls here are not flat, but curved and polished to a mirror-like finish using a mixture of crushed seashells and fine river sand. In the exact center of this domed, perfectly dark chamber sits an aging pharaoh holding a small, exquisitely crafted silver mallet. He is surrounded by an array of heavy, cast bronze bowls and perfectly tuned alabaster gongs of varying sizes. This is his sanctuary of pure vibration, a place entirely devoid of the endless, sycophantic chatter of his courtiers, dedicated purely to his profound obsession with resonance and acoustic perfection. With a slow, deliberate motion, He strikes the largest bronze bowl with the silver mallet, closing his eyes as a deep, incredibly rich tone instantly fills the space. The sound does not dissipate quickly. Instead, the curved, polished walls catch the sound wave, bouncing it back and forth in a continuous, hypnotic loop that makes the very air tremble. The pharaoh sits cross-legged, allowing the low frequency to vibrate through his chest and settle deep into his bones, massaging his chronically tense muscles. In this pitch-black, echoing womb, he is utterly alone with a sound that feels older and more powerful than the gods themselves. This nightly acoustic bath is his secret method of washing away the deafening, exhausting noise of his daytime empire. As the night wears on and the thick darkness begins to thin into the pale gray of early dawn, these hidden, bizarre obsessions must be hastily packed away. The heavy wooden railing over the lion pit is covered. The ancient astrological scrolls are carefully locked inside an iron-bound chest, and the miniature wooden servants are hidden behind a heavy linen drape. The pharaohs wash their hands in scented water, scrubbing away the smell of raw meat, ancient dust, and fresh paint, preparing to don their heavy golden collars once again. Their private, eccentric comforts are swallowed by the waking palace, leaving behind only a lingering sense of mystery as we quietly slip out of the shadows, leaving them to face the blinding Egyptian sun. Chapter 4. The Weird Wedding Nights of Rome. Let us pull away from the hidden obsessions of the Egyptian pharaohs and drift across the dark, shimmering Mediterranean Sea, guiding you into the lavish bedrooms of Roman nobility to witness their unbelievable wedding night rituals. In this chapter, we will observe how the Roman royalty navigated a complex web of superstition, fear, and political interests during a long and incredibly strange night, surrounded by flickering oil lamps and the bizarre sense of protective amulets. The humid, incense-heavy air of the Nile gently fades away, replaced by the cool, crisp evening breeze blowing across the Palatine Hill in Rome. We find ourselves floating into the central atrium of a sprawling patrician villa, where the faint, lingering smell of roasted meats and spilled wine hangs heavily in the air. The grand, boisterous public celebrations of the wedding have just concluded, and the last drunken guests have been ushered out through the massive wooden doors. Yet, within the deepest, most secluded corridors of the house, the atmosphere is entirely devoid of romantic anticipation. Instead, it is heavy with a tense, almost suffocating air of strict superstition. Flickering bronze oil lamps cast long, dancing shadows against the polished marble walls, illuminating the anxious faces of household slaves as they prepare for the true, private rituals of the dark. Inside a dimly lit antechamber, the young bride sits rigidly on an ivory folding stool, her posture stiff and unmoving. Her face is still partially obscured by the heavy, flame-colored flammeum veil she has worn since the early hours of the morning. She is barely more than a child, caught up as a vital chess piece in a complex web of political alliances and vast family wealth. Two elderly female slaves, their faces lined with years of quiet servitude, gently approach her to adjust the heavy folds of her woolen tunic. The air around her smells sharply of crushed marjoram and burning sulfur, an unsettling, medicinal combination intended to cleanse the room of any lurking misfortune before the night truly begins. Before she can enter the marital chamber, a deeply unsettling detail of her daytime preparation must be addressed. Early that morning, her dark curls had been parted into 6 distinct locks using the iron head of a spear, specifically, a spear that had been pulled from the body of a fallen gladiator. As the elderly slaves carefully touch the woolen ribbons holding these locks in place, The bride shivers slightly in the cool draft. The metallic, ghostly association of the dead gladiator's weapon was fiercely believed to grant her fertility and the raw strength to endure future childbirth. In the quiet solitude of her room, stripped of the cheering crowds, the grim reality of being blessed by a dead man's violent weapon feels heavy, cold, and profoundly oppressive. Meanwhile, in the adjoining bedchamber, the groom paces nervously across the intricately tiled mosaic floor, the cold stones chilling his bare feet. He is an older, seasoned politician, a man who commands legions and speaks boldly in the marble halls of the Senate, yet tonight he is entirely at the mercy of ancient invisible terrors. He holds a small, tarnished silver amulet shaped like a phallus, a fascinus, tightly in his right hand, his thumb anxiously rubbing its worn surface for protection. He mutters quiet, breathless prayers to Mutunus Tutunus, the obscure god of marital fertility, terrified that a simple misstep could doom his marriage and his bloodline. The room smells faintly of stale wine and the bitter, sharp tang of anxiety sweat. The heavy oak door to the bedchamber finally creaks open, and the bride is slowly escorted to the threshold by her attendants. Here, a critical and bizarre moment of the night takes place in absolute, breathless silence. She must absolutely not step her own feet across the wooden frame, for stumbling now would severely anger the household gods and invite absolute ruin upon the new family. Instead, the groom steps forward, his face pale and serious in the lamplight, and physically lifts her over the threshold. The heavy, layered woolen garments make her incredibly awkward to carry, and they both hold their breath, their hearts pounding in an unromantic panic. Only when her feet safely touch the mosaic floor inside does a collective, silent sigh of relief pass through the dim room. The attendants quietly retreat, pulling the heavy door shut with a dull thud, plunging the newlyweds into a profound, isolated quiet. In the center of the room stands the lectus genialis, the towering marital bed, its wooden frame carved with elaborate deities and draped in thick, embroidered purple fabrics. But before they can even approach the mattress, the groom must perform a private offering to the shadowy corners of the room. He takes a small terracotta bowl filled with salted spelt meal and casts it onto a low-burning brazier. The grains pop and hiss violently in the glowing coals, a sharp, sudden noise that makes the bride flinch in the near darkness. This tiny, domestic sacrifice is meant to appease the spirits of the ancestors watching silently from the shadows. Following the sacrifice, the couple must perform the ritual of touching fire and water, the two most essential elements of a Roman household. A silver basin of pure spring water and a small, burning torch of pine wood rest on a small bronze table beside the bed. The groom dips his fingers into the freezing water, then gently guides the bride's trembling hand to do the same, the cold shock grounding them in the quiet moment. They then hold their hands briefly over the warm, crackling flame of the pine torch, letting the heat dry the moisture from their skin. This silent exchange is not a gesture of affection, but a strict legalistic pantomime, sealing her transition from her father's household gods to those of her new husband. As they finally sit on the edge of the towering bed, the sheer absurdity of their surroundings becomes glaringly apparent beneath them. Hidden beneath the plush feather mattresses are various strange objects placed there earlier by the older superstitious women of the house. There are smooth river stones to ensure a strong foundation, small bundles of pungent herbs to ward off sickness, and tiny, carved wooden figures of fertility deities pressed against the wooden slats. The mattress is lumpy, uneven, and incredibly uncomfortable. forcing the couple to sit rigidly side by side to avoid the hard lumps pressing into their legs. Instead of a soft, welcoming nest, the bed feels like a sacred altar littered with uncomfortable talismans. The time finally comes to remove the bride's veil and the complex knot securing her woolen tunic, known as the Knot of Hercules. This knot, tied specifically to ward off evil spirits, can only be untied by the groom, but the physical reality of the stiff, thick wool requires careful, frustrating loosening. He fumbles with the heavy fabric in the dim light, his fingers trembling slightly as he tries not to pull too hard or tear the garment, which would be a terrible omen. The bride sits perfectly still, staring straight ahead at the flickering wall, the awkward silence between them filled only by the rustling of coarse wool. The romanticized idea of a wedding night dissolves entirely into a tense, clumsy mechanical puzzle. Outside the incredibly thick walls of the villa, the sprawling city of Rome slowly settles into an uneasy, rumbling slumber. The distant barking of feral dogs and the occasional clatter of a night watchman's cart replace the roaring noise of the daytime crowds. Inside the chamber, the few remaining oil lamps begin to sputter and smoke, their blackened wicks drowning in the shallow pools of exhausted oil. The groom reaches out and pinches the last struggling flame into darkness, leaving the room illuminated only by a thin sliver of pale silver moonlight slicing through the wooden shutters. In the pitch black, the vast differences in their ages, experiences, and fears suddenly shrink down to the heavy, shared darkness. In this total darkness, stripped of the cheering daytime processions, the beautiful floral crowns, and the carefully painted masks of nobility, they are just two incredibly frightened humans. The weird, superstitious wedding night of ancient Rome was never a celebration of unity or love, but a meticulous navigation through a terrifying minefield of potential curses and divine wrath. They lie back onto the lumpy, herb-stuffed mattress, staring up at the invisible ceiling, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of each other's breathing. They are painfully aware that their union is a duty to the state, a transaction of power sealed with bizarre rituals and the ghosts of dead gladiators. As the cold night deepens, the pungent smell of sulfur and marjoram slowly settles into the heavy woolen blankets covering them. The heavy burden of survival, legacy, and duty presses down upon them like the massive marble columns of the temples outside. We will leave them in their dark, quiet chamber, backing away slowly as they drift into an exhausted, uneasy sleep among the hidden amulets. The dancing shadows of Rome fade into the background, allowing the quiet currents of history to gently carry us forward, ready to seek out the next hidden, scandalous corner of the ancient world in the chapters to come. Chapter 5: Scandals and Intrigues in the Ottoman Harem. Let us unveil the hidden scandals and silent power games played within the secluded walls of the Ottoman Empire's harem. Through the heavy scent of incense and locked doors, we will witness the true, whispered lives of the concubines after the Sultan has finally fallen asleep. As the terrified Roman newlyweds drift into their uneasy, amulet-guarded sleep, the cool Mediterranean breeze carries us further east, across centuries and continents. The sharp smell of sulfur and marjoram dissolves into the rich, intoxicating aroma of rosewater, musk, and burning aloeswood. We descend upon the sprawling Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, where the rhythmic, dark lapping of the Bosphorus Strait echoes against immense, impenetrable stone walls. Here, deep within the labyrinthine heart of the royal complex, lies the harem, a forbidden sanctuary of supreme luxury and suffocating isolation. It is well past midnight, and the absolute ruler of the Ottoman Empire has finally retired to his private chambers, plunging the rest of the gilded cage into a tense, whispering darkness. The entrance to this secluded world is guarded by towering, silent sentinels, the chief black eunuchs wrapped in heavy layers of dark, rustling silk. In the dim light of hanging brass lanterns, their faces are unreadable masks as they turn massive oiled iron keys in the locks of thick cedar doors. Each heavy metallic click of the tumblers is a stark, echoing reminder to the hundreds of women inside that their world ends precisely at these velvet-draped thresholds. These eunuchs are not merely guards, they are the ultimate gatekeepers of power, the only men allowed to walk these halls. Their silent footsteps on the marble floors dictate the rhythm of life and fear within the deeply secluded quarters. Beyond the locked doors, the labyrinth of the harem unfolds in a dizzying display of wealth and confinement. The winding corridors are lined floor to ceiling with exquisite, hand-painted Iznik tiles, depicting endless, perfect gardens of blooming tulips and hyacinths. A cruel, permanent substitute for the real nature these women are forbidden to freely explore. The stone floors are cold beneath the bare feet of the night maids, who scurry through the shadows carrying brass warming pans. The air here is perpetually heavy, weighed down by the continuous burning of expensive frankincense and ambergris in tall bronze braziers, a suffocating perfume meant to mask the scent of countless confined lives and unwashed anxieties. Inside the sprawling, communal dormitories, the official silence mandated by the Sultan's slumber is carefully, quietly broken. The youngest concubines, stripped of the incredibly heavy, jewel-encrusted silk caftans they are forced to wear during the day, lounge on low, plush divans in simple, breathable cotton shifts. The flickering glow of a single tallow candle illuminates their faces, revealing an exhaustion born not of hard physical labor, but of the relentless psychological strain of forced perfection. They spend their days standing perfectly still for hours, their eyes cast downward in absolute submission, their bodies aching from the rigid postures demanded by court etiquette. Now, in the dim light, they finally allow their shoulders to slump and their tired muscles to relax. Without the watchful, terrifying gaze of the Valid Sultan, the Queen Mother, they drop their practiced, vacant smiles. In the faint amber light, a few girls gather closely together in a corner, passing a small, chaste silver cup of warm, spiced salep flavored with a dusting of cinnamon. The warmth of the sweet drink soothes their raw throats, tired from singing and reciting poetry to entertain the court. As the cup passes from hand to hand, their voices drop to the softest, most breathy murmurs, barely audible over the distant sound of the wind rattling the wooden window shutters. This quiet communion is their only true luxury, a brief window of genuine human connection in a world built on ruthless competition. These midnight whispers are the true currency of the harem, a shadow economy of secrets, alliances, and rumors traded exclusively in the dark. A young girl from the rugged Circassian mountains leans in, her dark, unbound hair cascading over her shoulders, sharing a piece of dangerous gossip she overheard from a laundrymaid. She whispers of a rival concubine in the upper quarters who was caught secretly hoarding a forbidden, bitter herbal tea. It is a desperate, highly illegal concoction meant to terminate a pregnancy that could threaten the delicate, cutthroat hierarchy of the royal court. The girls listen with wide, terrified eyes, knowing that such a scandal carries the penalty of being sewn into a weighted sack and dropped into the freezing Bosphorus. Another girl meticulously braids a frayed silk thread to calm her nerves, listening intently as they dissect the subtle shifting moods of the Sultan during his evening meal. Every raised eyebrow, every dismissive wave of his hand, and every dish he refused to taste is analyzed with deadly seriousness. In this beautiful, suffocating prison, a single moment of favor can elevate a slave to the status of an empress, while a momentary slight or a misplaced word can mean permanent exile to the old palace. They study his preferences like ancient scholars, decoding a lethal text, their very survival dependent on anticipating the desires of a man who views them as little more than decorative possessions. Farther down the tiled hallway, a thick, warm mist seeps from beneath the heavy wooden doors of the royal hammam, the bathhouse. Even in the dead of night, the marble floors here are slick and heated from beneath by roaring subterranean furnaces. A solitary concubine sits on a raised, heated marble slab, using a rough goat hair mitt to scrub away the heavy, pore-clogging cosmetics applied earlier that day. The dripping of condensation from the domed ceiling echoes loudly in the cavernous, empty room. The bathhouse, free from the prying eyes of the eunuchs, often serves as a damp, echoing sanctuary for the most secretive meetings, where alliances are forged and betrayals are planned amidst the blinding, fragrant steam. In a separate, slightly more lavish private chamber, an older, favored concubine sits alone before an intricately inlaid mother-of-pearl mirror. She is carefully mixing a small, fresh batch of crushed pearl powder and bitter almond oil in an agate bowl, a secret, fiercely guarded concoction meant to preserve her fading youth. While the younger girls in the dormitories dream of catching the Sultan's eye, she is meticulously planning her survival for the inevitable, terrifying day he finally loses interest. She stares at the faint lines forming around her eyes in the mirror, the dim lamplight highlighting the physical toll of years spent navigating the treacherous, venomous politics of the inner court. Hidden beneath the corner of the thick, priceless Persian carpet covering her floor is a loose floorboard. Beneath it lies a small, incredibly heavy leather pouch filled with gold coins, uncut emeralds, and small vials of rare rose oil, slowly accumulated through years of quiet bribery and smuggled messages. As she massages the cooling pearl paste into her skin, her eyes reflect the harsh, unromantic reality of her existence. She knows her beauty is merely a rapidly depreciating asset, and her only true security lies in the shadows, in the hidden wealth she can use to bribe eunuchs or ensure a comfortable retirement when she is eventually replaced by someone younger. Deepest within the harem, protected by the thickest walls and the most loyal guards, the Valid Sultan is also awake. Her opulent suite smells of heavy, intoxicating musk and aged sandalwood, a scent that commands immediate obedience. She does not need to whisper in the dark. Her power within the harem is absolute, yet her nights are equally consumed by the exhausting, intricate game of survival. Sitting upright on a massive bed, draped in heavy cloth of gold, she reads by the bright, steady light of a crystal lamp. Her lap is covered in parchment scrolls, lists of new slave arrivals, expenses for the kitchens, and highly classified reports from her vast, invisible network of eunuch spies. With a sharp, practiced eye, she carefully orchestrates which young concubine will be presented to her son the following evening. She is not playing matchmaker. She is playing high-stakes geopolitics, manipulating his affections to ensure her own political faction remains dominant and her rivals are marginalized. She crosses out a name with a harsh stroke of ink, effectively erasing a young woman's future with a single gesture. The loud, rhythmic scratching of her quill pen against the thick parchment is the sound of a ruthless mother coldly managing the destiny of an empire from the luxurious confines of her velvet-lined bedroom, trusting absolutely no one. As the night deepens further into the pitch-black hours of early morning, the whispers in the dormitories slowly fade into the rhythmic, shallow breathing of uneasy sleep. The thick silk curtains block out the moonlight entirely, leaving the rooms in absolute, suffocating blackness. Outside, the dark waters of the Bosphorus continue their endless, indifferent churning against the palace's seawalls, a stark, mocking contrast to the stagnant, heavily monitored lives trapped inside. The air in the rooms grows chilly, and the young girls huddle tightly beneath their heavy wool blankets, their dreams transporting them back to the open steppes, the mountain villages, or the bustling local markets they were violently taken from as children. In these fleeting, profoundly quiet hours of darkness, stripped of the heavy jewels, the suffocating perfumes, and the relentless political machinations, they are allowed a brief, tragic moment of private humanity. But soon, the haunting melodic call to prayer will echo across the massive domes of Istanbul, piercing the quiet sanctuary of the harem. The massive iron locks will click loudly once more, and the eunuchs will march through the tiled corridors to wake them. The women will rise, wash away their dreams, and meticulously reapply their flawless, obedient masks, ready to navigate another exhausting day of treacherous palace intrigue. For now, we will leave them to their final hour of silent rest, gently backing away into the shadows to seek out the next hidden corner of history. Chapter 6. A Male Concubine's Dusk in Greece. Let us step into the quiet, fading light of a male concubine's day in ancient Greece, feeling the glamorous yet fragile rules of his survival. Through the scent of warm olive oil and the gentle echoes of a private bathhouse, we will witness their tenderness, hidden helplessness, and the endless waiting at the very edge of power. As the heavy iron locks of the Ottoman Harem echo behind us, the oppressive, incense-filled darkness slowly clears. We are carried gently westward by the warm, salty breeze of the Aegean Sea, arriving in the golden, sun-drenched courtyards of classical Greece. It is late afternoon, the golden hour, when the harsh Mediterranean sun softens into a rich, honeyed light that washes over the white marble pillars of a wealthy statesman's sprawling villa. The air here is entirely different. It is not choked with fear, but rather perfumed with the light, herbal scent of crushed thyme, and the sweet, lingering aroma of ripening figs. In this peaceful, sunlit world, we find a different kind of gilded cage, one built not of stone and iron, but of fleeting beauty and delicate social graces. In a quiet, breezy room facing the sea, a young man sits gracefully on a polished wooden stool, the fading sunlight tracing the flawless, sculpted lines of his youthful shoulders. He is an Eromenos, a deeply cherished male companion to the powerful master of the house. Unlike the concubines locked away in dark dormitories, his prison is an invisible one, constructed entirely from the shifting affections of his powerful patron. A servant stands behind him, gently pouring warm, golden olive oil, infused with the scent of wild narcissus, into his palms. The servant massages the fragrant oil into the young man's skin, making his muscles gleam softly in the warm light, a meticulous preparation for the evening's grand symposium. The young man rises and wraps a thin, finely woven linen cloth around his waist, walking slowly toward the villa's private bathhouse. The sound of water gently trickling from a carved bronze lion's head echoes softly against the blue-painted walls. The air is humid and warm, entirely free from the frantic rush of the city's public squares and loud political assemblies. He steps down into the shallow sunken pool, the cool water instantly soothing his sun-warmed skin, washing away the dust of the day and the sticky residue of the massage oil. In this quiet, echoing chamber, accompanied only by the soft lapping of the water, he allows his perfectly practiced, serene expression to momentarily drop, revealing a quiet, profound weariness. He picks up a smooth piece of pumice stone from the edge of the pool, methodically scrubbing his already pristine heels with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Staring at his own wavering reflection in the clear water, he considers the incredibly fragile nature of his existence. His power and influence within the villa are absolute, yet they are entirely dependent on the smoothness of his skin and the youthfulness of his features. He knows with a quiet, devastating certainty that the day his first wrinkle appears, or his youthful grace begins to stiffen, his status will evaporate like the morning mist over the Aegean. His entire life is a beautiful, delicate performance, played out on the razor-thin edge of a powerful man's fleeting desire. Emerging from the bath, another servant approaches with small bronze tweezers, an instrument of precise, stinging discomfort. Any stray body hair that threatens the aesthetic ideal of absolute, statuesque youth must be meticulously and painfully removed. The young man leans his head back against a cool marble column, closing his eyes and enduring the sharp, repetitive plucks in absolute silence. He is not permitted to wince or complain. To do so would break the illusion of his divine, effortless perfection. The faint smells of singed hair from a nearby brazier, used to heat the tools, mixes with the lingering scent of narcissus oil, a stark olfactory reminder of the physical pain required to maintain his breathtaking, celebrated beauty. Moving back to his airy bedchamber, a small, low wooden table has been set with his evening meal. While the older men at the upcoming symposium will feast heavily on roasted meats and rich sauces, his diet is strictly monitored to preserve his slender, athletic physique. He slowly eats a small handful of fresh, dark figs, a piece of dry barley bread dipped in honey, and drinks water slightly flavored with weak, tart wine. He chews slowly, staring out at the olive trees swaying gently in the evening wind, feeling the hollow ache of hunger in his stomach. This quiet, solitary meal is a daily ritual of denial, a necessary sacrifice to ensure his body remains a flawless canvas for his patron's adoration. Physical beauty alone is never enough to hold the attention of a highly educated Greek statesman. He must also be an intellectual equal. He moves to a beautifully carved cedar chest and carefully unrolls a papyrus scroll containing the works of Homer and the latest philosophical dialogues. In the fading natural light, he squints slightly, memorizing complex verses and witty retorts to deploy during the evening's conversations. His mind must be as sharp as a bronze blade, ready to playfully spar with the most powerful philosophers, generals, and politicians in the city. The pressure to be endlessly charming, insightful, and perfectly spoken weighs heavily on his youthful shoulders, an exhausting mental acrobatics hidden behind a serene, unbothered smile. Setting the scroll aside, he carefully lifts a beautifully crafted wooden lyre, its arms made from genuine polished tortoise shell, from its resting place on a silk cushion. Plucking the gut strings with practiced, incredibly gentle fingers, he listens to the clear, resonant notes vibrating through the quiet room. He slowly turns the small wooden tuning pegs, bringing the instrument into perfect, harmonious alignment with a soft, humming focus. His role tonight is to provide a soothing, enchanting soundtrack to the symposium, playing melodies that will ease the minds of men burdened by war and statecraft. The vibration of the wood against his chest is a comforting, grounding sensation, a rare moment of pure, solitary artistic connection. In the corner of his room, catching the last rays of the dying sun, sits a magnificent set of polished bronze armor and a finely woven, deeply dyed crimson cloak. These are extravagant gifts from his wealthy patron, undeniable public declarations of favor and deep affection. Yet, as the young man runs his fingers over the cold, hard bronze of the breastplate, he feels the heavy, unspoken expectations attached to every gift. They are golden chains, binding him ever tighter to a man who controls his entire destiny, his social standing, and his future in the city. He views these beautiful objects not just as treasures, but as constant, gleaming reminders of his absolute dependence and his lack of true freedom. He returns to sit by the open window, his fingers resting lightly on the strings of the lyre, watching as the sun finally dips below the horizon. The sky transforms, painting the restless sea in deep, melancholic shades of indigo and dark violet. From the front of the sprawling villa, the distant sounds of heavy wooden doors groaning open, hearty bursts of laughter, and the clinking of clay wine cups signal the arrival of the evening's powerful guests. The waiting is the hardest part of his day, a quiet, suspended animation where he must gather all his emotional energy for the exhaustive performance ahead. He takes a long, slow breath of the cooling sea air, letting the twilight melancholy wash over him one last time. As a servant arrives to summon him, carrying a sputtering oil lamp that casts dancing, nervous shadows on the painted walls, the young man stands up. He leaves the quiet safety of his twilight solitude, carefully adjusting the precise folds of his translucent himation so it drapes perfectly over his shoulder. He smooths his dark, oiled curls one last time, taking a deep breath to push down the lingering weariness and anxiety. In an instant, his face transforms. The quiet, vulnerable boy looking at his reflection in the bathhouse vanishes entirely. He replaces his profound exhaustion with a bright, welcoming, and entirely flawless smile, slipping flawlessly into the role of the enchanting, untroubled companion. He walks down the torchlit corridor toward the andron, the loud, echoing dining hall reserved strictly for men, his beautiful lyre held securely against his chest. The smell of roasting lamb and heavy, unmixed wine grows stronger with every step, signaling the end of his private peace. We will not follow him into the crowded, noisy banquet to watch his performance, but instead, leave him here at the threshold. As he steps into the bright, flickering light of the feast, we allow his gentle music to fade into the background. We drift gently away into the deepening, starry Greek night, leaving him to his gilded existence, ready to uncover the next hidden truth of the ancient world. Chapter 7. The True Cost of Beauty Standards in Ancient Rome. Let us explore the absurd daily life and the deeply painful price paid by Roman royalty for the illusion of extreme beauty. Slowly, we will describe the royal beauty room made of highly toxic lead powder, strange animal fats, and quiet terror, revealing the skin ulcerations and morbid pursuits secretly covered up in the dark. The gentle, melancholic notes of the Greek lyre slowly dissolve into the starry night, replaced by the heavy, suffocating silence of a sprawling palace on the Palatine Hill. We are carried away from the warm, herbal breeze of the Aegean Sea and deposited into the humid, intensely perfumed heart of ancient Rome. It is the dead of night, long past the lavish banquets and political maneuverings of the day. We drift into an opulent, windowless beauty chamber, the cubiculum, entirely isolated from the rest of the imperial household. The air here is overwhelmingly thick, an unsettling mixture of incredibly sweet imported rose oils desperately trying to mask the sharp, metallic, and distinctly chemical odors of ancient cosmetics. In the very center of this dimly lit room, a high-ranking Roman noblewoman sits rigidly before an incredibly heavy, highly polished silver mirror. During the daylight hours, she is revered as the absolute pinnacle of aristocratic beauty, her skin resembling flawless, unblemished white marble. But tonight, illuminated only by the sputtering, yellow flames of a few bronze oil lamps, the devastating reality of this perfect illusion is about to be revealed. Her face feels incredibly tight, trapped beneath a thick, cracking layer of cerussa, a highly toxic white lead powder mixed with honey and animal fat. She takes a shallow, careful breath, feeling the heavy makeup pull uncomfortably against her exhausted facial muscles. A silent, trembling slave girl steps forward, holding a smooth wooden scraper and a damp sea sponge soaked in warm, diluted rosewater. With agonizing slowness, she begins to dissolve and scrape away the thick, hardened crust of white lead from her mistress's cheeks and forehead. The wet sponge makes a soft, squelching sound as it wipes across the skin, turning the water in the silver basin into a milky, poisonous slurry. As the artificial porcelain perfection falls away into the bowl, the true, hidden cost of Roman beauty standards is laid bare in the flickering light. The lethal chemical has done its silent, devastating work over the years. Stripped of the toxic camouflage, the noblewoman's actual complexion is a painful landscape of deep, premature wrinkles and angry, inflamed blemishes. The continuous, daily application of heavy lead has severely corroded her delicate skin, leaving it heavily scarred, incredibly dry, and dotted with full chemical burns. She stares into the silver mirror, the dim light casting harsh shadows over her ruined cheeks, her eyes devoid of vanity, holding only a quiet, profound resignation. She reaches up, her fingertips gently grazing the raw, stinging patches on her jawline, feeling the constant, dull, throbbing pain that she must never, ever acknowledge in the sunlight. To soothe the unbearable burning sensation left by the lead, another slave approaches carrying a small, carved alabaster jar containing a strange, gelatinous mixture. It is a highly expensive, deeply unpleasant poultice made from the rendered fat of swans, crushed white beans, and the fresh milk of a donkey. The slave uses 2 smooth fingers to gently spread the thick, gooey paste over the woman's raw, sensitive skin. The immediate physical relief of the cooling moisture is profound, but it is accompanied by an incredibly sour, gamey odor that entirely overwhelms the fading scent of the rose oil. The noblewoman closes her eyes, forcing herself to endure the nauseating smell in exchange for a few hours of physical relief. The painful, secretive rituals are far from over. The noblewoman blinks rapidly, her vision terribly blurred, her eyes aching fiercely from the dim light of the lamps. To achieve the highly desired look of large, luminous, and emotionally deep eyes, she had squeezed drops of extract from the deadly nightshade plant, belladonna, directly into her pupils earlier that morning. Now, as the toxic paralysis slowly wears off in the dark, her eyes feel as though they are filled with crushed glass. A slave gently places cool, damp linen cloths soaked in steeped chamomile over her eyelids, a desperate, incredibly gentle attempt to calm the violent, pulsing headache radiating from her overstrained optic nerves. Beside her, on a low marble table, sits a terrifying array of harsh, caustic chemicals used to achieve the golden blonde hair that Roman society so intensely idolized. There are clay bowls filled with a potent, burning mixture of beechwood ashes and liquefied goat fat, alongside pungent vials of fermented pigeon droppings. The woman's natural dark hair has been relentlessly bleached and stripped by these aggressive compounds, leaving it incredibly brittle, dry, and breaking off entirely at the roots. She carefully reaches to the back of her head, her fingers brushing against small, painful, bald patches that are fiercely hidden during the day beneath elaborate, towering, artificial hairpieces. In a shadowy corner of the chamber, an elderly slave works silently on a wooden mannequin head, meticulously weaving one of these massive, necessary wigs. The golden hair she threads through her needle is exceptionally soft and completely natural, because it was violently shorn from the heads of captive Germanic women, brought back by the legions. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of the wooden comb against the stolen blonde locks echoes strangely in the quiet room. It is a grim, deeply ironic juxtaposition. The ruling class, covering their chemically burned, balding heads with the raw, vibrant life force of the people they have brutally conquered and enslaved. The noblewoman then turns her attention to her teeth, dipping a rough linen rag into a small bronze pot filled with an abrasive, pale powder. This mixture is made from crushed pumice stone, ground animal bones, and baking soda intended to aggressively scrub away the stains left by rich red wines. She rubs the coarse rag firmly across her teeth, the harsh scraping sound vibrating uncomfortably through her jawbone in the silent room. The intense friction causes her tender, inflamed gums to bleed, the bright red blood mixing with the white powder, leaving a sharp, incredibly bitter taste of copper and chalk lingering in the back of her throat. For the thick, calloused skin on her elbows and heels, she utilizes an ointment known as essepum, a thick, greasy substance extracted from the unwashed wool of sheep. As the slave rubs the yellow grease into her aching joints, the room fills with the overpowering, deeply animalistic stench of a damp, dirty flock. The sheer absurdity of the Roman beauty standard is intoxicatingly clear. To appear as a flawless, sweet-smelling goddess in the grand forums, one must spend the night completely slathered in toxic metals, sour milk, and the foul-smelling sweat of livestock. The lady breathes exclusively through her mouth, trying desperately to ignore the severe sensory assault of her own remedies. Throughout this entire agonizing process, the slaves, known as ornatresses, work in absolute, terrified silence, their breathing shallow and carefully controlled. They know that this beauty chamber is a volatile, incredibly dangerous place, where the physical pain of the mistress easily translates into brutal punishment for the servant. A single misplaced hairpin, a slightly too forceful scrub of the pumice, or a dropped mirror could result in being fiercely stabbed with a sharp, silver hair needle. The tense, heavy atmosphere in the room is not just created by the toxic chemical fumes, but by the thick, palpable fear radiating from the women forced to administer these painful treatments. Finally, as the exhaustion of the day and the pain of the treatments fully take over, it is time for the final overnight mask to be applied. A slave mixes a thick, heavy dough of finely milled breadcrumbs, completely soaked in fresh ass's milk, plastering it meticulously over the woman's face like wet clay. In the dying, flickering light of the bronze lamps, the noblewoman looks less like a beautiful patrician and more like a pale, featureless ghost trapped within a damp, heavy cocoon. The dough quickly begins to dry and tighten, effectively locking her facial muscles in place, guaranteeing that she will not be able to smile, frown, or even easily open her mouth until dawn. She rises slowly, her body gleaming with bizarre animal fats, and her face encased in the hardened, sour-smelling crust, and moves stiffly toward her high wooden bed. Because of the delicate, easily ruined mask on her face and the heavy oils coating her limbs, she cannot curl up or sink comfortably into her feather pillows. She must lie perfectly flat on her back, her arms resting rigidly at her sides, assuming the exact posture of a corpse laid out for burial. This is the ultimate quiet tragedy of her existence, even in the deeply private, supposed sanctuary of her own bed. True rest and physical comfort are entirely impossible. The last oil lamp finally runs dry, its wick emitting a final, sputtering hiss before plunging the toxic, foul-smelling beauty chamber into total, forgiving darkness. We leave the noblewoman lying rigidly in the blackness, silently enduring the burning of her skin and the aching of her eyes, a prisoner of her empire's impossible, damaging standards. As the heavy, incense-laden air of Rome begins to settle, we will quietly back out of the room, letting the cool night carry us away. We are ready to drift further into the past, seeking out the cold, stone corridors of the medieval world, where entirely different yet equally deadly rules of the night await us. Chapter 8. Strange Medieval Castle Rules. Let us walk through the cold, damp stone corridors of a medieval fortress, listening to the crackle of burning torches. We will reveal the strange medieval castle rules that could get you killed, forcing kings and queens to carefully obey them before they could finally rest. The toxic fumes and the suffocating, heavy heat of the Roman beauty chamber slowly dissipate into the cool night air. We are carried far away from the Mediterranean basin, traveling centuries forward into the dense, foreboding forests of medieval Europe. The moonlight struggles to pierce through the thick canopy of ancient oak trees, finally illuminating the jagged silhouette of a massive stone castle perched atop a rocky cliff. The wind howls aggressively against the thick, unyielding granite walls, a stark contrast to the stifling stillness we just left behind. We drift effortlessly through the iron portcullis, entering a world where paranoid survival dictated every single moment of a royal's life, especially when the sun went down. Inside the fortress, the atmosphere is intensely claustrophobic, smelling of damp earth, old wood, and the pungent, unmistakable scent of animal tallow. We float down a seemingly endless, incredibly narrow stone corridor, where the only source of light comes from iron sconces mounted on the weeping walls. The torches crackle and spit aggressively, casting long, wavering shadows that dance like restless ghosts across the uneven floorboards. The deep chill of the stone completely penetrates the thickest wool cloaks, making the very air feel heavy and deeply unwelcoming. This is the isolated, heavily guarded inner sanctum of the royal family, a place where extreme, often fatal rules of etiquette were strictly enforced to prevent sudden assassinations. We approach the heavy oak door of the king's private bedchamber, bound in thick iron and guarded by two incredibly tense knights who barely dare to breathe. Before the king can even think about sleeping, a bizarre and exhaustive security ritual must commence in absolute, terrified silence. The massive iron key, which has been closely guarded by the chamberlain all day, is finally produced to lock the chamber from the inside. However, an absurd medieval rule dictates that the keyhole must immediately be sealed with hot, dripping wax, stamped with the royal seal. This ensures that no hidden servants or assassins can slip a poisoned blade or a secondary key through the tiny, vulnerable opening during the vulnerable night. Before the physical preparation of the bed begins, the spiritual armor must be firmly secured, a process guided by an exhausted, shivering personal chaplain. The king kneels on the freezing stone floor, his bare knees pressing painfully against a small embroidered cushion that offers entirely insufficient relief. He must meticulously recite a highly specific sequence of Latin prayers, designed to ward off demons, sudden illnesses, and the ever-present threat of nocturnal witchcraft. Finally, he leans forward to kiss a small, silver reliquary, supposedly containing a splinter of the true cross, its metal surface shockingly cold against his lips. This ritual is not a peaceful communion with the divine, but a desperate, terrified plea for basic survival until the morning light. Inside the surprisingly cramped chamber, the king stands shivering in his linen nightshirt as the exhausting process of preparing his bed begins. His royal bed is an imposing structure, essentially a room within a room, surrounded by incredibly thick, dusty velvet curtains to keep the freezing drafts out. But before he can climb in, the mattress, stuffed with coarse straw and goose down, must be violently stabbed and beaten by trusted squires wielding long wooden poles. This is not to make the bed more comfortable, but a deadly serious, mandated check to ensure no assassin has somehow sewn themselves inside the mattress during the day. The loud, rhythmic thumping echoes loudly, a violent prelude to a supposed night of peace. Once the mattress is deemed safe and free of hidden physical threats, an even more peculiar, deeply paranoid ritual involving the royal linens takes place. We watch as the chamberlain takes a small, rough piece of bread and slowly, methodically rubs it across the fresh linen sheets, the feathered pillows, and the heavy wool blankets. He then feeds the bread to a small hound kept entirely for this grim purpose, waiting in tense silence for any sign of convulsions. The fear of contact poisons, deadly toxins supposedly smeared on the fabric to absorb through the king's skin, was a pervasive, terrifying shadow over the medieval court. Only when the hound happily swallows the bread is the bed officially declared safe for the monarch. With the physical and spiritual sweeps of the room complete, the king must don his specific sleeping garments, which offer little in the way of true comfort. He wears a heavy, unbleached linen nightshirt that reaches down to his ankles, tightly laced at the neck to prevent cold drafts and evil spirits from entering his body. Strangely, he is also required to wear a tight-fitting linen quiff over his hair, tied securely beneath his chin to protect his head from the dangerous night humors. Beside him, hidden beneath the heavy woolen blankets, lies a naked broadsword, its polished steel blade resting uncomfortably close to his leg. The cold metal is a stark, constant reminder that even in sleep, he is a soldier. Yet, the bizarre rules of the castle demand one final, deeply uncomfortable sacrifice before sleep can even be attempted. A servant carefully approaches the large stone fireplace, which has been providing the only source of comforting warmth in the freezing, damp room. Using a heavy iron snuffer, he completely extinguishes the fire, plunging the room into immediate, freezing darkness. This was a mandatory, fatal rule. Many paranoid royals preferred risking extreme hypothermia over the terrifying possibility of an assassin using the chimney to drop silently into the room under the cover of night. The sudden absence of the crackling flames leaves the chamber feeling hollow, exposing the king to the harsh, unforgiving chill of the castle walls. To provide an additional layer of primitive security, a pack of large, heavily muscled mastiffs is ushered into the bedchamber before the doors are finally sealed. These enormous dogs do not sleep peacefully on soft rugs. They restlessly pace the perimeter of the room, their heavy claws clicking sharply against the uneven stone floorboards. Their thick fur smells strongly of wet earth, wood smoke, and raw meat, adding a distinctly feral odor to the already claustrophobic atmosphere of the royal bedroom. The king relies on their incredibly sharp hearing and aggressive instincts to alert him to any subtle scraping in the chimney or faint footsteps outside the door. However, their sudden barks at imaginary shadows often jolt him awake, transforming his protectors into sources of terrifying anxiety. Now shrouded in complete oppressive blackness, the king lies perfectly still, listening to the relentless howling of the wind battering the thick glass windows. Another deadly rule strictly forbids the king from calling out or speaking to his guards in the dark, lest his exact position in the bed be revealed to someone lurking in the shadows. If he needs to use the ornate silver chamber pot hidden under the bed, he must do so in absolute, paralyzing silence, navigating the freezing floor entirely by touch. A single stumble or a clattering lid could trigger a panicked, violent response from the nervous guards outside, leading to a tragic, bloody misunderstanding in the pitch-black room. He breathes quietly, trapped in his own heavy bed. Far across the castle, in a completely separate, equally isolated wing, the queen endures her own terrifying version of these nightly survival rituals. Her massive oak door is secured by 3 separate heavy iron bolts, each requiring a different highly ornate key held by 3 different supposedly trusted ladies-in-waiting. These women must swear terrifying, blood-binding oaths before the castle's bishop, promising to never let the keys out of their sight, even while they bathe. The heavy clanking of these iron keys hanging from their belts is a constant, stressful soundtrack to the queen's evening preparations. She watches them with exhausted, deeply suspicious eyes, knowing perfectly well that, throughout history, the most devastating betrayals often came from the very women smiling warmly beside the royal bed. Because medieval medical beliefs were deeply entwined with superstition, the queen must sleep entirely upright, propped against a small mountain of stiff, unforgiving pillows. Physicians of the era firmly dictated that lying flat would allow the body's humors to pool dangerously in the head, causing sudden death or madness during the night. She sits rigidly in the dark, her neck aching profoundly, desperately trying to find rest, while balancing in a highly unnatural, exhausting posture. The heavy, velvet curtains drawn tightly around her bed make the air incredibly stagnant, smelling faintly of dried lavender and overwhelming, quiet anxiety. She cannot toss or turn. She must remain completely still, a beautiful frozen statue trapped within the luxurious confines of her heavily guarded bedchamber. Beside her bed sits a beautiful, jewel-encrusted goblet, but it remains completely empty, adhering to yet another bizarre and potentially lethal castle regulation. It was strictly forbidden to leave any drinking water or wine exposed in the royal chambers overnight, no matter how desperately thirsty the monarch might become. This rule was born from the widespread, terrifying belief that malevolent spirits, or night miasmas, could settle into the stagnant liquid and poison the drinker from the inside. If she wakes with a parched throat, she must simply endure the profound discomfort until dawn, listening to her own shallow breathing. The fear of invisible, supernatural threats was just as powerful, if not more so, than the fear of real, steel-wielding assassins hiding in the shadows. As the deep, freezing hours of the medieval night slowly stretch on, the immense stone castle remains locked in a state of tense, paranoid suspension. The king and queen, the most powerful figures in the realm, are essentially helpless prisoners within their own heavily fortified, freezing bedchambers. Their daily survival depends entirely on adhering to a rigid, exhausting checklist of bizarre rules, sacrificing every ounce of personal comfort for the mere illusion of safety. We will leave them shivering in the dark, bound tightly by their deadly superstitions, and the cold stone walls. We silently drift backward through the sealed oak doors, ready to explore the hidden, sinful indulgences that these same royals secretly enjoyed when they thought no one was looking. Chapter 9. Sinful Foods of the Royal Court. Let us recreate the private foods secretly considered sinful on the tables of medieval and ancient royalty. We will describe the faint light of late night and heavy silver goblets, telling how rulers secretly tasted bizarre ingredients absolutely forbidden to commoners in the dead of night, avoiding the watchful gaze of religion. We leave the shivering king and queen bound tightly by their deadly superstitions in the dark. The deep, freezing hours of the medieval night slowly stretch on, but not everyone in the massive stone castle is sleeping. We slip down a narrow, winding, spiral stone staircase, leaving the heavily armed, freezing guards far behind us. We approach a heavy, iron-reinforced oak door hidden completely behind a faded, dusty tapestry depicting a long-forgotten saint. Here, a faint, warm orange glow seeps from beneath the ancient wood, accompanied by the incredibly rich, heavy scent of roasted bone marrow, sizzling fat, and hot, spiced wine. This is the secret feasting chamber, a hidden place where the strict, pious rules of the daylight hours are quietly, deliberately broken in the dead of the night. Inside this small, windowless room, the air is thick and warm, heavy with the overwhelming aroma of forbidden indulgences. A solitary, aging monarch sits slouched in a high-backed wooden chair covered in soft, incredibly thick, bare fur. In the daylight, he is the fiercely devout defender of the faith, strictly adhering to the church's rigorous fasting schedules and publicly forcing himself to eat plain, salted fish and dry, coarse bread. But now, illuminated only by the dying, red embers of a small, secret hearth, his lap is covered with a napkin of fine bleached white linen, heavily stained with dark grease. He holds a heavy, ornately carved, silver goblet filled with thick, unwatered crimson wine, a stark, dramatic contrast to the ascetic image he projects to his subjects. On the small, scratched oak table before him rests the ultimate symbol of royal transgression, a beautifully roasted swan, its magnificent, snow-white feathers carefully reattached after cooking to create a stunning, lifelike illusion. Eating such a majestic, heavily protected creature was a profound display of wealth, but consuming it during a holy period of mandatory fasting was a deeply, undeniably sinful act. The king reaches out with a sharp silver dagger, carefully slicing a piece of the rich, dark, steaming meat. The crispy skin crackles softly in the quiet room, a sharp, distinct sound that feels almost deafening in the secretive, heavy silence. He brings the glistening meat to his mouth, closing his tired eyes as the incredibly rich, fatty flavor heavily coats his tongue and palate. The dark meat is heavily coated in a thick, luxurious sauce made from crushed bitter almonds, expensive sour wine, and a completely absurd, almost offensive amount of imported spices. He tastes the sharp, biting heat of black pepper, the warm, comforting sweetness of cinnamon, and the exotic, numbing tang of cloves and fresh ginger. These spices were brought over treacherous trade routes from the distant, mysterious East, costing more than their actual weight in pure, solid gold. To the rigid medieval church, such overpowering, intensely sensual flavors were deeply suspicious, firmly believed to ignite dangerous bodily passions and irreparably corrupt the immortal soul. But in this hidden room, the king deliberately courts that corruption, letting the intense heat of the ginger aggressively burn the back of his throat. The king chews slowly and methodically, the rhythmic, damp sound echoing faintly against the cold, bare stone walls of his secret sanctuary. With every single bite, he experiences a complex, intoxicating mixture of profound religious guilt and intense rebellious physical pleasure. He knows perfectly well that if the castle bishop were to discover this secret midnight feast, the political and spiritual fallout would be utterly devastating. Yet, it is precisely this intense, lingering fear of sudden discovery that makes the rich meat taste so incredibly, undeniably sweet. He takes a long, slow draught from the heavy silver goblet, the strong, dark wine washing away the rich animal fat and briefly numbing the persistent, gnawing anxiety that dictates his every waking moment during the daylight hours. We leave the medieval king to his quiet, guilty feast, drifting smoothly backward through the vast corridors of time to the ancient world, seeking out another profoundly hidden indulgence. The smell of roasted swan and heavy wine fades entirely, replaced by the incredibly sweet, almost cloying floral scent of warm honey and crushed imported rose petals. We arrive in a lavish, heavily draped silk tent on the remote fringes of a vast, unforgiving desert empire, where an ancient ruler reclines heavily on a massive pile of embroidered cushions. The air here is warm and perfectly still, entirely untouched by the harsh, scouring sandstorms raging outside. Here, the sin is not against a rigid church, but against the sheer scarcity of the harsh world outside. Before this incredibly powerful ruler sits a massive, shallow dish crafted entirely from iridium, hammered, solid gold, filled with a terrifyingly decadent, bizarre delicacy. The roasted tongues of thousands of tiny, vibrant songbirds, meticulously collected and prepared by an army of silent, terrified slaves. The sheer scale of the relentless slaughter required to produce this single, incredibly small dish is entirely staggering. A quiet, brutal testament to his absolute unchecked authority. The ruler uses long, delicate silver tongs to carefully pick up a single, tiny roasted tongue, dipping it incredibly slowly into a small, carved crystal bowl of thick, raw, imported mountain honey. The syrupy, golden liquid drips slowly back into the bowl, catching the flickering light of the scented oil lamps like drops of liquid amber. He carefully places the sweetened, golden morsel onto his own tongue, letting the delicate, incredibly tender meat dissolve slowly and completely against the roof of his mouth. There is absolutely no nutritional value here, no basic sustenance required for human survival. It is pure, unadulterated, entirely selfish textural indulgence. The extreme, near impossible rarity of the dish provides a deep psychological thrill that entirely eclipses the actual physical taste of the meat. He is quite literally consuming the silenced, beautiful voices of thousands of innocent birds, a dark poetic demonstration of his terrifying ability to consume the beauty of the world without a single fleeting thought for the terrible cost. He chews in absolute silence, his dark eyes half closed, deeply savoring the profound, untouchable privilege of his extreme isolation. Just a few hundred yards away, beyond the thick, heavy canvas walls of the royal tent and the heavily armed, watchful perimeter guards, his loyal subjects are sleeping on the hard, unyielding, freezing earth, their stomachs aching with the sharp, hollow pain of chronic, unending hunger. They survive solely on coarse, gritty barley bread and muddy, contaminated river water, firmly believing their ruler is a flawless divine figure who completely transcends the basic, ugly human need for physical sustenance. If they could somehow peek through the canvas and see him now, covered in sticky honey and casually chewing on the tiny tongues of songbirds, the fragile, carefully constructed illusion of his divinity would shatter instantly. This secret gluttony is a highly dangerous, fragile secret guarded fiercely. To carefully wash down this unimaginably decadent meal, The ruler does not reach for fresh spring water, or even the finest imported common wine. Instead, a silent servant steps seamlessly from the deep shadows carrying a small, incredibly delicate glass vial filled with incredibly strong, highly acidic, fermented fruit vinegar. The ruler slowly produces a massive, completely flawless white pearl from a soft leather pouch tied at his waist, an object of such unimaginable wealth that it could easily feed an entire, sprawling city for a full year. With a perfectly calm, entirely detached expression, he drops the priceless, shimmering jewel directly into the glass vial. He watches with quiet, cold fascination as the acidic vinegar begins to aggressively hiss and bubble around the sphere. He sits perfectly still, observing the violent chemical reaction as the incredibly strong acid slowly but surely dissolves the magnificent, priceless jewel into a cloudy, bitter, unappealing white slurry. Once the magnificent pearl has completely vanished, leaving absolutely nothing behind but a milky residue swirling in the pungent, sour liquid, he slowly raises the delicate glass vial to his lips. He drinks the sour, chalky concoction in one smooth, unbroken motion, his face betraying no emotion. He winces only slightly as the sharp, burning acid forcefully makes its way down his throat, a strangely painful, uncomfortable sensation that he actively, deliberately seeks out in the quiet night. He is not drinking for physical pleasure or thirst, but simply to physically consume his own insurmountable, ridiculous wealth. By swallowing this dissolved fortune, he is quietly, definitively proving to himself that his earthly power is so absolute, so entirely unquestionable, that he can literally swallow a vast fortune just to satisfy a fleeting, arrogant midnight whim. It is the ultimate quiet display of royal arrogance, a deeply sinful waste of resources witnessed only by the dancing, silent shadows on the tent walls. As the heavy, exhausted hours of the night drag slowly on, these secret, incredibly sinful feasts slowly come to their inevitable ends. The medieval king wipes his greasy, stained hands on the ruined white linen, watching the very last red embers of his hidden fire fade into cold gray ash. The ancient ruler waves away his heavy golden dishes, sinking deeply into sleep. Servants silently materialize from the surrounding darkness like phantoms, quickly moving to scrub the heavy silver goblets and carefully hide the tiny leftover bones, meticulously erasing all physical evidence of the night's quiet transgressions. By the time the sun finally rises over the stone castles and the desert dunes, they will once again wear their flawless, unyielding masks of pious, untouchable, and perfect leaders. We will leave them to slowly digest their heavy, secret guilt in the fleeting, forgiving darkness. The overwhelming smell of rich, imported spices and sour, dissolved pearls slowly fades into the cool night air, washed entirely away by the clean, approaching dawn. We gently back away from the hidden chambers, letting the heavy, embroidered tapestries fall perfectly back into their rightful place. As we leave these hidden feasting rooms behind, sealing the shameful secrets tightly within the cold stone walls, we drift effortlessly further along the quiet, flowing currents of history. We prepare to gently uncover a completely different kind of royal secret, one born not of extreme physical pleasure or gluttony, but of desperate, terrifying, and profound physical pain. We are heading away from the dining tables and moving slowly toward the dark, frightening, and intensely superstitious world of royal medicine. In the next chapter, we will witness the bizarre, entirely failed cures, and the desperate rituals that ancient kings and queens utilized when the terrifying shadow of the plague finally breached their heavily fortified palace walls. Chapter 10. Failed Cures of the Plagued Royalty. let us step into the terrifying and superstitious world of royal medicine during the darkest times of the plague. We will witness the bizarre, failed cures and desperate rituals performed in secret chambers, accompanied by the thick smoke of burning herbs and slow chanting. The overwhelming smell of rich, imported spices and sour, dissolved pearls from the secret feasting chambers slowly fades into the cool night air. We are heading away from the dining tables and moving slowly toward the dark, frightening, and intensely superstitious world of royal medicine. We find ourselves back within the thick, weeping stone walls of a medieval European fortress, but the atmosphere has drastically changed. The previously paranoid silence has been replaced by a heavy, suffocating dread that no iron portcullis can keep out. The terrifying shadow of the plague has finally breached the heavily fortified palace walls. The air is thick, nearly unbreathable, choked with the pungent, stinging smoke of burning rosemary, juniper, and sulfur. Large iron braziers are stationed at every corner of the dimly lit corridors, their roaring fires meant to aggressively purify the supposedly corrupted night air. The crackling flames cast long, erratic shadows across the faces of terrified servants who move quickly and silently, their mouths and noses tightly bound with vinegar-soaked linen cloths. We approach the king's private bedchamber, the very same room where we previously witnessed the paranoid security rituals of the mattress and the tasting hound. Now, the heavy velvet curtains are drawn completely shut, turning the grand bed into a dark, claustrophobic tomb. Inside, the absolute ruler of the realm lies shivering violently under layers of heavy wool blankets, completely stripped of his regal majesty. His skin is pale and slick, with a cold, unnatural sweat, and his breathing is shallow, ragged, and painfully loud in the quiet room. A group of the kingdom's most esteemed physicians stands at a cautious distance, their faces hidden behind dark cowls. They speak only in hushed, terrified whispers, fully aware that their extensive knowledge of ancient Greek medical texts is entirely useless against this creeping rot. Desperation breeds absurdity, and in the face of inevitable death, the royal physicians turn to the most expensive, bizarre treatments imaginable. An elderly doctor, his hands trembling slightly, approaches a small wooden table illuminated by a single sputtering beeswax candle. Using a heavy brass mortar and pestle, he is meticulously grinding a collection of flawless, deeply colored emeralds and perfectly spherical pearls into a fine, glittering powder. In the medieval mind, these precious stones were believed to possess pure, divine light capable of absorbing the dark, corrupted humors of the plague. The harsh, scraping sound of the brass pestle against the priceless gems echoes sharply in the quiet, tense room, a stark auditory reminder of a desperate fortune being literally ground into dust to buy just a few more hours of life. Once the precious gems are reduced to a fine, iridescent dust, the physician carefully sweeps the powder into a silver goblet filled with heavily spiced, aged wine. He approaches the bed slowly, holding his breath to avoid inhaling the corrupted air directly surrounding the monarch. Two heavily guarded squires gently lift the incredibly weak king, supporting his head so he can drink the gritty, chalky concoction. As the king swallows the dissolved fortune, he winces, the sharp fragments of the poorly ground emeralds scratching against his raw, inflamed throat. It is a profoundly tragic scene. The most powerful man in the kingdom is essentially swallowing his own crown jewels, seeking a magical cure from cold, hard stones while his biological reality continues to ruthlessly deteriorate. When the crushed gemstones fail to bring the promised relief, the physicians move to an even more terrifying and dangerous remedy, known as theriac. This legendary, incredibly expensive medicinal paste is kept in a sealed alabaster jar containing over 60 bizarre ingredients, including roasted viper flesh and highly addictive opium. The dark, sticky paste smells intensely of bitter roots, old honey, and sharp metallic blood. A physician uses a small silver spoon to place a dollop of this foul-smelling mixture directly onto the king's trembling tongue. The extreme, desperate logic of the era dictated that by introducing a small amount of deadly poison into the royal body, it would miraculously stimulate the organs to fight off the greater poison of the plague. It is a terrifying gamble played out in the dim, flickering candlelight. When the poisonous paste offers no comfort, the physicians resort to a cure born purely from desperate superstition. A terrified servant enters the room carrying a small wooden cage containing several live, cooing white pigeons. Following ancient, flawed medical texts, a physician carefully takes a bird, his hands trembling, and uses a small blade to swiftly cut the creature in half. In a bizarre, deeply unsettling ritual, the still warm, bleeding halves of the bird are pressed directly against the swollen, painful lymph nodes on the king's neck. The belief was that the pure, vibrant life force of the innocent bird would aggressively draw out the dark, corrupting venom of the illness. The soft, tragic cooing of the remaining birds in the corner contrasts sharply with the grim, bloody reality of the royal sickbed. As the pigeon's warmth quickly fades without effect, another physician steps forward holding a small, deeply wrinkled object tied with a silk string. It is a dried toad, specifically prepared by being baked slowly in an earthen pot until it was entirely dehydrated and brittle. He gently places this grotesque, leathery amulet directly over the king's heart, resting it against the clammy, sweating skin. The doctors watch with wide, anxious eyes, genuinely expecting the dried amphibian to magically swell and absorb the invisible miasma radiating from the royal body. The room smells heavily of the dried, dusty skin mingling with the medicinal herbs, creating an olfactory nightmare. The king remains motionless, too weak to brush the absurd, useless talisman away from his chest, entirely at the mercy of their panicked ignorance. As the night stretches on, and the king's fever continues to climb dangerously high, the doctors decide to employ the most common, yet visually brutal, medical practice of the age: bloodletting. A small brass bowl is carefully positioned beneath the king's pale, deeply veined arm. A physician, muttering a quick Latin prayer for guidance, uses a highly polished, incredibly sharp silver lancet to make a swift, precise incision in the crook of the royal elbow. Thick, dark blood flows sluggishly into the basin, the metallic scent instantly mingling with the overwhelming odor of burning sulfur and sweet opium. They firmly believe they are draining the stagnant, diseased humors from his failing body. But in reality, they are only accelerating his profound exhaustion, quietly draining his last remaining reserves of strength into a cold metal bowl. While the physical body is subjected to these agonizing, failed cures, the spiritual battle is simultaneously waged in the shadows of the room. A group of exhausted monks kneels on the freezing stone floor in the corner, their heads bowed low as they continuously chant slow, mournful Latin hymns. The low, rhythmic drone of their voices vibrates gently through the heavy, smoky air, providing a deeply melancholic soundtrack to the medical desperation. They surround the bed with supposed holy relics: a fragment of bone from a martyred saint and a piece of rusted iron claimed to be from a holy nail. The king, floating in and out of a painful, feverish delirium, desperately clutches these cold, dead objects to his chest, praying for a divine intervention that the empty, echoing castle walls cannot provide. While the king endures these agonizing treatments, we drift through the thick walls to find the queen in her own forced, terrifying isolation. She has been sealed in a separate, windowless chamber to avoid infection, surrounded by an overwhelming array of burning sulfur and crushed garlic. She sits entirely alone on a simple wooden stool, the grand velvet gowns replaced by a plain, unadorned linen shift. The crushing silence of her room is a stark contrast to the frantic, panicked energy of the king's sickbed. She stares blankly at the heavy iron bolts locking her inside, painfully aware that her survival depends entirely on staying locked in this suffocating, heavily perfumed cage while her husband fights his final battle just down the hall. Eventually, the grueling medical rituals cease, not because the king is cured, but simply because there is nothing left for the physicians to try. The doctors retreat quietly into the shadows, their eyes filled with a grim, unspoken resignation. The massive bedchamber falls into a tense, heavy silence broken only by the crackling of the braziers and the harsh, labored breathing of the dying monarch. In this terrifying, deeply private moment, all the vast armies, the hoarded gold, and the divine titles are rendered entirely meaningless. He is no longer a king. He is just a frightened, fragile human being, completely alone in the dark, waiting for the dawn. We will leave him in this quiet, tragic struggle, backing away slowly from the suffocating smoke and the grim realities of medieval medicine. As the deep, freezing hours of the medieval night slowly stretch on, the immense stone castle remains locked in a state of tense, paranoid suspension. The elaborate, absurd medical rituals have done nothing but add unnecessary suffering to the king's final hours. We leave the frightened royals shivering in the dark, bound tightly by their deadly superstitions and the cold stone walls. We silently drift backward through the sealed oak doors, leaving the pungent smell of burning herbs and crushed gemstones far behind us. The dark, terrifying shadow of the plague gradually fades into the cool night air as we prepare to follow the gentle currents of history southward. In the next chapter, we will travel to the starlit deserts of Egypt, seeking out the final, quiet resting place of the most famous Queen of the Nile. Chapter 11. The Mystery of Cleopatra's Tomb. Let us leave the suffocating, plague-ridden halls of medieval Europe and travel back to the starlit deserts of Egypt. We will reconstruct the final, desperately quiet hours of Cleopatra, the last queen of the Nile, and the elaborate, secretive plan she devised to hide her final resting place forever. The dark, terrifying shadow of the plague and the pungent smell of burning sulfur gradually fade into the cool night air. We are carried swiftly backward through time and southward across the globe, arriving on the balmy, starlit shores of Alexandria, Egypt. The relentless howling of the medieval wind is replaced by the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the Mediterranean Sea against the smooth white marble of the royal harbor. It is the sweltering month of August in the year 30 BC, and the once mighty Ptolemaic kingdom is drawing its final, rattling breaths. High above the dark water, within a heavily fortified, windowless mausoleum originally built to house her vast treasures, the most famous queen in history is preparing for her own inevitable end. Inside the thick, impregnable limestone walls of the monument, the air is overwhelmingly heavy with the scent of burning myrrh, cedarwood, and the sharp tang of ancient dry dust. The heavy bronze doors have been permanently barred from the inside, sealing off the queen and her two most trusted handmaidens, Eros and Charmian, from the encroaching Roman army outside. Cleopatra sits quietly on a beautifully carved ivory chair, illuminated only by the weak, flickering glow of a few remaining alabaster oil lamps. The room is filled floor to ceiling with unimaginable wealth, piles of uncut emeralds, heavy golden statues, and fragrant pearls. Yet in this suffocating darkness, they are nothing more than cold, entirely useless stones. The legendary beauty that had captivated two of Rome's most powerful generals is now overshadowed by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Her iconic, elaborate makeup has been completely washed away, leaving her pale skin looking fragile and deeply etched with the lines of relentless stress and sorrow. She is dressed not in the heavy golden robes of the goddess Isis, but in a remarkably simple, soft white linen tunic that clings loosely to her thin frame. On a low ebony table beside her rests a simple woven basket made of river reeds, supposedly containing a gift of fresh, sweet figs brought in from the countryside. She reaches out, her fingertips gently brushing the rough, dry leaves covering the fruit, feeling the terrifying, hidden cargo coiled beneath. Before she approaches the basket, she must complete one final, highly intimate ritual of royal preparation. Her handmaidens approach silently, their faces stained with dried tears, carrying small silver bowls of warm, perfumed water. With agonizing slowness, they gently wash her arms, her neck, and her tired feet, cleansing away the cold sweat of fear and the dust of the besieged city. They massage rare, heavily scented blue lotus oil into her skin, preparing her body not for a grand political banquet, but for her final permanent journey into the underworld. The gentle splashing of the water and the soft, stifled sobs of the women are the only sounds breaking the heavy, tomb-like silence of the sealed chamber. Clean and beautifully perfumed, the queen moves to a small wooden writing desk, pulling a fresh blank sheet of papyrus toward her. She dips a sharp reed pen into a clay pot of black soot ink. Her hand surprisingly steady despite the overwhelming despair crushing her chest. The scratching of the pen against the papyrus echoes sharply in the quiet room as she composes her final, defiant message to Octavian, the Roman conqueror, waiting just outside the walls. She does not beg for her life or for mercy. She only demands, with the absolute unyielding authority of a pharaoh, that she be buried alongside her beloved Antony. She carefully rolls the scroll and seals it with warm red wax, pressing her royal signet ring firmly into the cooling clay. The scroll is handed to a Roman guard through a small, secured iron grate in the door, effectively signaling the absolute end of her earthly reign. Cleopatra then returns to the carved ivory chair. Pulling the woven basket of figs onto her lap, she takes a deep, stabilizing breath of the incense-laden air, closing her eyes as she reaches deep beneath the broad green leaves. A sudden, sharp hiss pierces the quiet room, followed immediately by a small, violent flinch from the queen. She pulls her hand back, a pair of tiny, dark puncture wounds already swelling slightly on her pale wrist. The deadly Egyptian asp, a sacred symbol of divine royalty, has delivered its venomous, fatal blessing. The venom of the asp is not violent or bloody. Instead, it brings a heavy, terrifyingly swift numbness that begins to creep slowly up her arm. She leans back into the soft silk cushions of her chair, her breathing becoming shallow and remarkably calm as the pain of her worldly defeats slowly melts away into the dark. Seeing their queen slipping into the shadows, her fiercely loyal handmaidens do not hesitate for a single moment. They reach into the woven basket themselves, willingly accepting the serpent's bite to accompany their mistress into eternity. The three women sit in the dim, flickering candlelight, forming a quiet, tragic tableau of absolute devotion, waiting patiently for the heavy curtain of death to finally fall. Minutes later, the heavy thud of Roman battering rams begins to violently shake the thick limestone walls of the mausoleum. The deafening crash of splintering wood and shouting soldiers shatters the serene, quiet atmosphere of the death chamber. The bronze doors finally give way, and Octavian's heavily armed guards rush into the dimly lit room, their iron swords drawn and ready for a desperate fight. Instead, they freeze entirely in their tracks, disarmed by the profound, devastating silence of the scene before them. Cleopatra lies perfectly still on her golden bed, looking as though she has merely fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep, while Charmian uses her last ounce of fading strength to lovingly adjust the royal diadem on the queen's lifeless brow. Octavian had desperately wanted to parade the defeated queen through the bustling, cheering streets of Rome in heavy golden chains, but her quiet suicide robbed him of his ultimate prize. To prevent her from becoming a powerful, enduring martyr for the Egyptian people, he granted her final written wish, ordering her body to be buried alongside Mark Antony. However, the exact location of this burial was kept a profound, heavily guarded state secret. Under the cover of a moonless night, a small, completely silent procession of trusted priests carried the heavy, sealed sarcophagi out into the vast, unforgiving desert. They marched purposefully into the shifting sands, leaving absolutely no markers, no grand pyramids, and no carved inscriptions behind. The relentless, howling desert winds immediately swept over their footprints, erasing the path back to the royal lovers within minutes. For over 2 millennia, the shifting, golden dunes of Egypt have fiercely protected this final, private sanctuary from grave robbers, ambitious archaeologists, and the prying eyes of the modern world. Countless fortunes have been spent, and entire lifetimes dedicated to finding Cleopatra's lost tomb. But the desert remains entirely silent, refusing to give up its greatest, most captivating secret. The queen who lived her entire life on the grandest, most public stage imaginable ultimately secured the most private, impenetrable resting place in all of human history. As the sun slowly rises over the Mediterranean, casting a blinding, golden light across the endless waves of sand, the memory of the Ptolemaic dynasty fades into ancient myth. We leave the desert wind to its eternal, whispering work, guarding the sleeping queen in the deep, cool earth below. The intense drama of her final hours dissolves entirely into the quiet, patient rhythm of the turning centuries. We will gently step away from the sun-drenched dunes, preparing for our final journey tonight. In our next and final chapter, we will watch the narrative lens slowly pull back, turning the obsessive fears and hidden lives of all these ancient rulers into the quiet, settling dust of history. Chapter 12. The Silent Rest in History's River. Let us pull the narrative lens slowly back, turning the obsessive fears and hidden lives of all these ancient rulers into the quiet, settling dust of history. We will summarize their absurd, secret lives, gently guiding you into a deep, peaceful sleep within the profound quiet of the past. The intense, tragic drama of Cleopatra's final hours dissolves entirely into the quiet, patient rhythm of the turning centuries. We leave the sun-drenched dunes of Egypt behind, allowing the perspective to drift slowly upward, rising above the vast, dark Mediterranean Sea. The fierce desert winds continue their endless, whispering work, blowing golden sand over the forgotten footprints of priests and emperors alike. From this high, detached vantage point, the grand empires that once commanded the world seem incredibly small. nothing more than scattered stones bathed in pale, forgiving starlight. The relentless urgency of ancient survival has finally ceased. Looking back down toward the winding Nile, the massive granite temples of the pharaohs stand hollow and silent. The incredibly heavy golden collars that once bruised royal collarbones have long since been stolen or buried deep within the earth. The paranoid rulers who clutched bone amulets in the dark, terrified of their own mortality, are now nothing but dry, brittle dust resting inside glass museum cases. Their bizarre midnight obsessions with captive lions, poisonous gardens, and celestial charts have completely evaporated. The exhausting daily performance of maintaining a flawless divine illusion is finally, permanently over. Drifting westward over the Italian peninsula, the once bustling Palatine Hill in Rome is now a quiet collection of overgrown marble ruins. The suffocating, windowless beauty chambers, where noblewomen endured excruciating chemical burns from toxic lead powder, are completely gone. The heavy, lumpy mattresses, stuffed with superstitious herbs, and the cold mosaic floors crossed with absolute terror during weird wedding nights, have crumbled into ordinary soil. The suffocating weight of duty, legacy, and extreme beauty standards that haunted the Roman elite in the pitch-black hours has been entirely washed away by the slow, indifferent reign of time. Gliding eastward toward the dark waters of the Bosphorus Strait, the sprawling, labyrinthine corridors of the Ottoman Harem finally know true peace. The massive cedar doors and heavy iron locks that once imprisoned hundreds of women have long since rusted and splintered. The desperate, hushed midnight whispers of pregnant concubines, the terrifying political machinations of the Queen Mother, and the suffocating scent of heavy musk have all vanished. The women who spent their nights carefully hoarding gold coins and decoding the Sultan's moods are no longer trapped in that beautiful, terrifying, gilded cage. Sweeping over the rugged coastline of the Aegean Sea, the opulent, sunlit villas of classical Greece lie in quiet, scattered ruins. The gentle, echoing bathhouses where male concubines anxiously scrubbed away the physical toll of their precarious existence are now completely dry and filled with weeds. The beautifully crafted tortoise-shell lyres and the heavy, burdensome gifts of bronze armor have oxidized into green, fragile relics. The exhausting, delicate mental acrobatics required to maintain the absolute affection of a powerful patron are no longer necessary. They are finally free from the agonizingly short lifespan of their own celebrated beauty. Moving deep into the dense, dark forests of northern Europe, the towering stone fortresses that once housed shivering, paranoid monarchs are now peaceful, moss-covered landmarks. The terrifying, deadly rules of the medieval castle, the violently beaten mattresses, the food-tasting hounds, and the pitch-black, freezing bedchambers are merely curious footnotes in old manuscripts. The desperate, gruesome medical rituals involving crushed emeralds, dried toads, and bleeding lancets during the horrors of the plague have long been replaced by modern understanding. The monarchs who clutched holy relics in feverish terror have finally found the absolute cure of eternal rest. Even the secret, deeply sinful midnight feasts, enjoyed in hidden chambers, have lost all their rebellious thrill. The heavy silver goblets that once held sour, dissolved pearls, and the golden plates piled high with the roasted tongues of songbirds are buried in the dark earth. The intense, conflicting emotions of supreme arrogance and profound religious guilt that spiced those clandestine meals have faded entirely. The grand rulers who believed they were entirely above the laws of nature and the common hunger of their people eventually succumbed to the exact same. inescapable fate as the poorest peasant shivering outside their walls. In the end, despite their vast armies, their hoarded wealth, and their desperate attempts to manipulate fate, all these ancient royals were united by the heavy, isolating burden of power. Behind the heavy velvet curtains and the impenetrable stone walls, they were simply vulnerable humans terrified of the dark, fighting silent, exhausting battles that history books rarely bother to record. Their carefully constructed daytime personas were beautiful, intimidating masks that always had to be painfully removed when the sun went down. The night was their ultimate, undeniable equalizer, stripping away their empires and leaving them alone with their frailties. Now, bring your focus gently back to the present moment, to the soft, quiet reality of your own room. You are not bound by the deadly, paranoid rules of a medieval castle, nor are you forced to wear the excruciating, toxic makeup of a Roman patrician. You do not have to nervously guard your door against political assassins, or hide your true thoughts behind a perfectly practiced, hollow smile. The night surrounding you is not a terrifying landscape of curses and plagues, but a safe, welcoming blanket designed purely for your comfort and absolute restoration. Sleep, that elusive, profound state that so many powerful pharaohs and monarchs desperately chased in the dark, is now waiting patiently for you. They fought against it with bizarre rituals. They feared the vulnerability it brought, yet it was the only true peace they ever found. You can surrender to it willingly, without the need for tasting hounds, armed guards, or crescent-shaped stone headrests. Let the heavy, turbulent histories of these long-gone empires sink quietly into the earth, their desperate struggles transforming into the gentle, rhythmic hum of the silent night. The oil lamps of the ancient world have all finally sputtered and died, leaving behind a pure, untroubled darkness. It is time to let go of the heavy golden crowns and the exhaustive demands of the waking world. Let your breathing slow down, matching the deep, eternal rhythm of the silent, ancient rivers we have traveled tonight. The story is over, the heavy palace doors are closed, and you are entirely safe to drift away. Let the deep quiet of history embrace you, carrying you softly into a profound, undisturbed, and beautiful dream. As you drift in this peaceful space, if you found comfort in our journey through the shadows of the past, please consider leaving a gentle like and subscribing to the channel to join us for future nighttime wanderings. Before you fully slip into sleep, I leave you with one final, quiet thought to carry into your dreams. If you were given absolute power over the entire world, but could never again enjoy a completely safe, untroubled night of sleep, would the heavy golden crown truly be worth wearing? Good night.